The 3-needle bind off is an efficient method to bind off 2 edges at the same time. And it produces a seam that's smooth and flat and has very little bulk. This particular technique is also a perfect finish for a provisional cast on, and it also works especially well for shoulders of a sweater because this particular bind off is very stable and it doesn't have a lot of stretch to it. So what I'm going to be doing today is I have 2 pieces of work here in 2 different colors, just to show you what it looks like as you're binding off. You're going to be doing this with right sides together. So this is my right side of my turquoise and the right side of my white. I'm going to be holding those together with my needles side by side. I'm going to be binding off with the yarn from my front needle. The yarn from my back needle, this turquoise, is just going to be laying down to the side, and at the very end we'll just weave that stitch in. Now what's important to remember is that you need to have the same number of stitches on both needles for this particular bind off to work. So I'm going to be doing it in 2 different ways. One as a continental cast off, and the second one will be as an English cast off. I'm a continental knitter and I do knit this way. However, I want to make sure that those people who also are English knitters understand this particular bind off. I'm going to be using a 3rd needle. That's why it's called a 3-needle bind off. I will be using a 3rd needle, which is 1 to 2 sizes bigger than the needles that my work has been completed on. So I'm going to be using, once again, the white yarn from my front needle. I'm going to be going into the first stitch on my front needle as if to knit. I'm going to be going into the first stitch on my back needle as if to knit, holding those 2 needles together, pulling my yarn through, and dropping both of the first stitches off the needle. This stitch is going to remain on this needle until I complete my 2nd stitch, and then we will be doing a pass stitch over. So on the first stitch on my front needle, I'm going to be coming in from the front as if to knit, going into the back needle, first stitch as if to knit, wrapping my yarn, and dropping both stitches off. Now I'm going to be passing this first stitch here over this stitch here. So I'm going to be using either tip of either needle. It doesn't matter which one works best for you, but we're going to pass that first stitch over the 2nd stitch. And this stitch will remain on the needle. We'll be doing the next stitch as if to knit, back needle as if to knit, pulling my yarn through, slipping off, and then I'll be doing a pass over. Okay, let's do that one more time. Going into the first stitch on my front needle as if to knit, going into the first stitch on my back needle as if to knit, pulling through, slipping off, and passing. First stitch on my front needle as if to knit, first stitch on my back needle as if to knit, wrapping my yarn, pulling it through, and passing. Okay, now for those of you who happen to be English knitters, we'll do this for holding your yarn in your right hand. Will be the same technique, going into the first stitch on the first needle as if to knit, going into the first stitch on the back needle as if to knit, pulling my yarn through, slipping both stitches off, and passing. Okay, front needle as if to knit, back needle as if to knit, pulling it through, slipping off, and passing. We'll finish all the rest of the stitches on this needle, and then I'll show you what the seam looks like when it's all finished. It makes a beautiful edge on a shoulder seam. And as I said at the very beginning, it works well for shoulder seams. You can also use it on the toe of a sock. When you're doing a provisional cast on for a scarf, you can use the 3 needle bind off as well. Okay, just a few more stitches to go. I'll show you how to finish your seam also once you have gotten to the very last stitch. Okay, knit the front stitch, knit the back stitch, pull your yarn through both, slip off, and pass. Now I'm down to my very last stitch on my seam, and as I stated before, I have the same number of stitches on each needle. Pass the last stitch over. Okay, now I've got one last loop here, and all I need to do is cut my yarn, and I can just pass that through. And pull it tight. Okay, now I'm going to show you what this looks like on the right side. This is what your seam will look like on the right side. Nice and smooth, there's not a lot of bulk. On the back side, it makes a beautiful, kind of a cable looking stitch. And it's nice and flat, there's nothing sticking up. So it's a very comfortable seam. Works well on the toe of socks. Okay, so there you have it. That is the 3 needle bind off.